plan is to have a unit test on Thursday.
My plan is to do a cycle, a 4-cycle full body explain it again.
Would you like me to?
No.
I'm willing. Are you a little confused by it?
No.
Would you like me to explain how it works?
No.
So basically the idea is this. We break it down into 4 cycles, like this. No, okay, I'll shut up. We are, so you can go ahead and write that on your calendar or your planner and whatever it is. We are going to have our first, I guess we should call it a cycle test, really. But we're going to have our first test. Maybe I'll just call it test number 1. We're going to talk about that tomorrow. Though long story short, all the stuff we've gone through. So the right angle trig we did using sine law, all of the measurement stuff, unit conversions. Anyway, tomorrow I'll do that. But just if you want to start thinking about that, maybe take a look at your notes, make sure you've got everything lined up. Thursday will be the day of your first unit test. Nope.
Do you put all the formulas and like?
Yep. Yeah, my tests are not sneaky, but no, they're not open book.
For the unit conversion, can you have one of those like meters, you know, like the steps? I always forget what order those are.
We'll talk. I think I might make that a question actually. I might want you to produce that.
Yeah, but I don't understand it.
Well, we can talk. Yeah, that might be something to practice. That might be, I think. We'll see. I haven't decided yet. I haven't made your test yet. Well, that's not true. I have made your test. I haven't finalized your test yet. I don't think so. I began writing your test on Saturday, but I haven't dialed it in. I never consider a test done until I always write it myself. And I time myself because my rule of thumb is to give students 4 times as much time as it takes me. Right? So when I taught in 60-minute classes, I need to be able to finish the test in 15 minutes. If I can do it in 15, then an hour seems reasonable. Obviously, with you guys, it's closer to 20 because you have 75-minute periods. Anyway, so today, last topic, indices. Putting a 2 in the middle just seems like how they would name a boy band in the 90s. Hey, this word, indices, what's that mean?
Oh, I heard there's something before that.
What's an indice? Well, not an. What are indices? You probably know the singular of it. That's a plural word. What's the singular of plural? Well, you know a word that starts ind.
Nice.
Ooh, good thinking, but back of the book. Back of the book, you want to look up things in the book, you look in the... Very good. Index. Okay, so when we talk about indices, we're just talking about an index. Now, in the back of a book, what's an index? What's an index? Good. It's the thing you go to find out where things are. And this is the same kind of an idea. In math, or in more specifically in statistics, we use an index to look up changes in the price of something. This says prices. You know, I'm doing this note sharing thing where we all make lessons. I don't know if I love it. I think I might just prefer to. But I don't want to necessarily focus in on prices. I want to focus on statistics. We want to focus on how statistics change over time. So we talked about finding the mean and the median and the mode and the standard deviation and the variance and all that. But that's all for a snapshot in time, right? You'd find all those things about the value of all this stuff at one moment. Now we're going to talk about the last thing for this unit. What happens if we take those values and ask what happens to them as time passes? That's super cool. So price indices describe the price of an item compared to a blank, measured at a particular time and place. And we just want to say standard. All right? So the whole idea is this. We compare the price of one thing to a standard value at a particular place and time. And the most important of these is something we call the consumer price index. the consumer price index. Yes. There we go. Okay, the consumer price index, which if you listen to the news, you'll sometimes hear called the CPI. C for consumer, P for price, I for index. Okay, folks, you'll have lots of time to work on that, I promise. Plenty of time, so just work with me here. Okay, here's the idea. For the consumer price index, the Canadian government has a statistical branch. They are called Stats Canada. Creative name, right? Stats Canada is amazing. You can go on Stats Canada's website, and whatever you're interested in knowing about Canadians, they have the statistics on it. Want to know how many people work in the banking sector? They can tell you. Want to know like how much money the average person makes in this city versus that city? They've got it. Want to know how much fish the average Canadian eats in a year? They've got it. If there's a statistic about Canadians, they have it. It's actually really interesting stuff. If you're ever doing a research project in like a geography class or like a world, like a anthropology or like anything like that, where you need to talk about like what Canadians do or how they behave, Stats Canada is probably tracking it. And one of the big things they track is how much things cost. I think about this a lot. I'm a teacher, right? Teachers get paid by whom? Government, right? So specifically, your parents, your guardians, whomever you live with, either own a home. If they own a home, they have to pay property taxes, right? Or they rent, right? My first house that I lived in on my own, I didn't own it, I rented it. But then I'm paying my rent to a guy who owns it, and he has to pay property taxes. So no matter what, property taxes get paid. That's most of where the school budget comes from. And then some comes from the provincial government from other taxes. So we pay taxes, and I get paid. Hey, good deal. I like getting paid. Interestingly, teachers in Ontario get paid the same all throughout Ontario, basically. In some places, they might make $400 or $500 more a year, $400 or $500 less a year. But in terms of what we make, that's a pretty small difference, right? Because the average teacher in Canada, in Ontario, I think is in like the high 60s, like 68,000 a year or something. So it's pretty good income, right? Here's the point. Who makes more? A teacher who makes $68,000 living in Welland, or a teacher who makes $68,000 living in Toronto? Yeah, why? You're totally right. Why? Because it's
Cheaper.
cheaper. What's cheaper?
Everything.
Everything is cheaper. Gas is cheaper, right? If you're ever driving to Toronto, make sure you fill up here. If you have to fill up in Toronto, it's going to be more expensive. Thank you so much. Food tends to be cheaper. If you go to a grocery store in Welland and you go to a grocery store in Toronto, you're going to find that the groceries in Welland cheaper. Clothes. You go to a clothing store in Welland, you go to a clothing store in Toronto, it's cheaper. Does that make sense? So even though a teacher here and a teacher there make the same money, they don't really make the same money because I can buy more stuff than somebody doing the same job as me who lives in Toronto. And God help you if you live something like, my sister lived for 5 years in Vancouver. Vancouver is unbelievable. The average home sale in Vancouver last year was for $900,000. That's the average house that's sold. It's insanity. The average house in St. Catharines, where I'm from, $350,000. A third of the cost, right? And there's places worse than Vancouver. So each year, Stats Canada takes a look at how much things cost over all around Canada. And they do a mix of different things. And they bundle it all up together, and they call that the Consumer Price Index. So they look and they say, Canada-wide, what are the kinds of things that people spend money on? Oh, sorry. Here you are. Well, what are some of the things you guys spend money on? Clothes. Good, definitely. So that's in there. In fact, they say that on average, Canadians spend about 5% of their earnings on clothing and footwear. So that's not necessarily where this comes from. But so this index, based on how much stuff costs, they put clothing into that cost. What else do you guys spend money on? Definitely. Food is a big one, right? Big, big, big one. And there it is. So, and they literally, this StatsCan hires people, and they will have people working all throughout the province, and they will go to the grocery store and look, what does a bag of milk cost? What does butter cost? What do eggs cost? What does flour cost? What does meat cost? All these different things, and they write it down. What else? Well, a big one, maybe not for you yet, but it will be transportation, right? If you like to drive, cars cost money. You want to take the bus, buses cost money, right? You want to take an Uber, Uber costs money. However you want to get around, costs money, right? Shelter, right? People have to pay rent. People have to buy a home. Alcoholic beverages and tobacco products. Those are things people spend money on. Related to that, health. You know, I have to pay. We kind of think that like, oh, healthcare is free in Canada, but it's not really, is it? Like going to the doctor is free. You pay for it. But if you need to take a Tylenol, you have to pay for that, right? If you get a prescription, most things you have to pay for your prescription, right? I broke my foot over the summer. I had to buy crutches. I had to pay for that, right?
Prescriptions are now free until you buy.
Yes, which is nice, and as it should be. Yes.
Free healthcare just means that when you go to the doctor on Tuesday, you get looked at.
Yeah, which by the way is huge because like if you're in the States, just that visit might cost you $250. And so then you ask the question, am I going to go? Maybe not. Maybe not, right? Maybe I just stay home.
I'm just sitting home.
Yeah, that's it. And so people just stay sick. Recreation, education, reading. Yeah. So they look at all this stuff and they figure out a baseline cost. And they basically figure out, hey, in this year, this is how much it cost to kind of be an average Canadian living in this country. Does that make sense? And they call that the index value. And they based it on statistics of how people spend their money. So they tried to figure out how people spend their money, and then they based the cost index off that. Does that make sense? So it's like taking a snapshot. Here's what it cost this year to be a Canadian. And then what do you suppose they do the next year? They do the same thing. Does that make sense? And year after year after year, they keep doing this. And when they do that, they build something called an index. In this case, the consumer price index. They take one statistic, but they take that statistic over and over again over time, and we track how it changes. And here's the graph. This is the consumer price index going up to 2006. I feel like this is a little lazy. We could have gotten a bit more recent than this, but that's okay. And it's based on this particular index is the 2002 index, because here's a rule that you can put on the side. As a rule, we always pick a number to call 100. This is kind of arbitrary, but indices, an index is always based on a value of 100. That's kind of your starting point. So if this one's based on 2002, they called how much stuff cost in the year 2002 100. Does that make sense? Oh, shoot. I already answered the first question. See, I made a note to myself how I was going to talk about this. That's okay. So what's the base year for this consumer price index? What year have they treated as 100? Yeah, the year 2002. And the nice thing about 100 is, if we talk about things out of 100, now we can think of everything as a percent. Does that make sense? So now, if we look by the year 2006, how much did stuff cost, roughly? What do you think? Yeah, roughly 110, maybe 109. So this means that the cost of things had gone up. So if a bag of bread cost $2 here, it'd be like $2.18 by then. If a gallon of gas cost $1 in 2002, which is about accurate, then it should have cost about $1.09 by 2006. Does that make sense? It just measures the steady climb of prices. So what year was the cost of this stuff, this basket of goods, about 90% of what it was in 2002? What year was it about 90% the cost? Well, that to me, if I go across, I'm reading that as like 97, 98. That's pretty high. So no, I wouldn't say that one. What do you think? Yeah, that one there. That looks good. What year is that? 96, 90, 94, 95, 96. Yeah. The 1997. I remember 1997. Do you? No, because you weren't alive yet. It's a good year. I enjoyed 97.
Why? Anything happen?
I got my first job. I worked in an accountant's office entering data into spreadsheets all day. It was boring, but I got paid like $11 an hour, which at the time was amazing. My next job, it was only a one summer gig, and then after that I had to get my second job, which paid $6 an hour. So I took like a 50% pay cut going to my second job.
Wow.
Because I could type real quick. That's why I got that first job. All right. What was the CPI in 1990? Looking at 1990. Not 88, but got it on the second time. Yeah, it was about 78%. What's that mean? What it means is this. $78 worth of stuff in 1990 would cost $100 by what year? That's right, in 2002. This happens slowly over time, right? Things get more expensive. That's why your grandparents can be like, when I was your age, a McDonald's hamburger cost $2. And my grandparents can be like, when I was your age, a McDonald's hamburger hadn't been invented yet. But when it was first invented, it was 5 cents, which is true, by the way.
You're just full of facts.
Yes. I'm very trivial.
You like going to trivia things?
I do.
You one of those people that get crushed when it almost hurts when you don't get one right?
No, I'm not competitive by nature. I'm kind of even-keeled by nature, I would say. I'm just sort of even. Oh, you don't think so? Well, I'll fight you. I'll fight you real good. Okay, what about from 90 to 91? What happens here? It's kind of the biggest example of this anywhere on the graph. What do we see between the year 1990 and the year 1991? Gosh, you guys are quiet today. Yeah, and it went up pretty quickly, didn't it? Like, look, if that line kept going, see how much higher this thing would have been all the way through? Like, that's a very steep line. That's a really steep increase. What's that mean for the cost of goods in that year? Yeah, the price went up quickly. That's about the Gulf War, I think, probably. I don't know how well you guys know your 1990s history, but in 1990, the United States went into the first Gulf War with Iraq over Kuwait, and it caused a big destabilization in the amount of oil on the market, and so costs went up a lot. It wasn't as bad as that. Like, if you look at pictures from in the late 70s, there was gas shortages, and you can find footage, it's crazy, of like lineups like 50 cars long at gas stations waiting to get gas. It was never like that in the 90s, but we had a bump where it got more expensive. And then we actually had another big bump in gas prices in like 2006, 2007. Yeah.
Yes, but I think before the country of studies, there was a huge rush of water in
That's good. That's crazy. There's a famous 5-day-long traffic jam that happened in China, if you can imagine this. It was crazy. So outside of Beijing, this traffic jam started, and for 5 days, traffic just didn't move, which is just mind-numbing. It just didn't. right?
Who's in the front?
Just gridlock, right? Like you have one breakup because you're talking about a huge highway system, right? And so this whole economy developed of like people who would go down with bottles of water and food and things like that and just charge obscene fees, right? And what are you going to do? You're trapped in a car. And then, of course, what happens is after you've been there 12 hours, maybe you go, screw it, I can walk. And you just leave your car there. Well, now what happens? Now your car's stuck there. People are going to do what? So yeah. Anyway. What happens to the cost of stuff over time? Describe the overall trend. What happens to the cost of stuff over time? Yeah. Very good. Things get more expensive on average every year. There's a term for this. Does anyone know what it is?
Yeah.
Well, you know, it's interesting. It's called, very good, inflation. Inflation's actually really important. We think of inflation as a bad thing, but it's a good thing. Japan has had for decades a real problem because they don't have inflation. Their economy's been kind of in a slump. And when you don't have inflation, if I own a business and I have to get my roof done, one of the things I might think about is that under normal inflationary patterns, every year the cost of things goes up about 2%. And so if I was doing a big roof on like a big building that was going to cost me $100,000, you know, a big project, and I knew that next year it's going to cost me $102,000, and the year after that it might be about $104,000. It's kind of in my mind, I go, when should I do this?
Now.
Soon, right? The sooner I do it, the better, because things are just going to get more and more expensive. But when things don't inflate, now you go, well, it might actually be cheaper next year. When should I do this? I'll just wait. I'll wait until I absolutely have to do it. And as a result, less things get done. Fewer people put roofs on. Fewer people buy new cars. Because if you think, geez, a new car might actually be a little cheaper next year, or at least it'll be the same, but I have the same amount of money, I'll just hold off. That prevents people from going out and spending money. And the problem is if you don't go spend your money at the car dealership, then the guy who works at the car dealership has one less sale. And if he has one less sale, he's got less money in his pocket, which means maybe they don't go out for dinner that month. You know, maybe normally we eat out once a month at a nice restaurant, but we can't afford it this month because I didn't make that sale, so we won't. And so now what happens to the guy who owns that restaurant? Well, he's got a little less sales. What about the waitress who works there, the waiter who works there? Well, he has a bit less money. She has a bit less money. And that all spills over. Does that make sense? So for an economy to work well, we want people to spend money. One of the ways we get people to spend money, know that your money is going to be worth a little bit less next year than it is now. So when should you spend it? Now, because you have the most buying power with it now. Does that make sense? By the way, that's not always a good idea from your perspective. You should make sure you save some money so you've got some money in the bank. But from the economy on the whole's perspective, they want you to spend money. They want you to be thinking, how can I spend money? Okay. Using the same graph, I want you to calculate the average rate of inflation from 90 to 2006. Take a minute, see if you can figure that out. The average inflation, the average rate of it going up. And then I want you, based on that, to see if you can guess what the CPI should have been in 2010. And then we'll go look it up and see if you were right. So what was the average change between 90 and 2006? How did you figure that out? Yeah, I hope the long weekend. That was good, thank you. I'll give you a minute. What do you got? No, I don't mean the chips. I can see that. What do you got for this?
I don't know.
No? Think about it for a minute. See if you can figure it out. Let me ask you this. Instead of just average change, what was the overall change from 90 to 2006? How much did it change? And there's no formula to this, per se. We're just going to kind of map it out. You can count on fingers if you want. Oh, come on. You can't tell me the change there? What was the index in? How much? 30. Good. How'd you do that? I think you're totally right. Okay, so it ends at 108, and it began at 78. So what can I do with those two numbers? Subtract them. And I'm going to do this on paper, but you can just do it with a calculator. 8 minus 8 is 0. 10 minus 7 is 3. So the difference is 30. How long did it take for that difference of 30 to happen? Very good. So that change of 30, by the way, is that going up or down? 30. It's going up. So plus 30 change took 16 years. What am I doing? Okay. Took 16 years. So how much is that per year? What could I do? Good. Very good. So 30 divided by 16. And we should get just shy of 2 when we do that. What do we get? Is it 1.825?
I got 1.8.
1.875. Right. Subtracting. I got it. The 1.875. Which means that on average, it goes up by 1 point, and I'm just going to make this 9 per year. That makes sense? We'd expect it to go up a little bit less than 2 every year. So then, what do we think it would be by 2010? So this chart ends at 2006. What should it be by 2010? What do you think? Well, how many more years from 2006 to 2010? How many years into the future are we trying to look? How many? 4. That's 4 more years, right? So if it's going to go up 4 more years, how much should it go up by? How much each year? 1.9, right? How many years? So what do I do with those two numbers to figure out what my increase is going to be? Yeah, 4 times 1.9, and that should be 7.6, I think. So from 108, it should go up by 7.6. So 108, 7.6 is going to give me I think 115.6. Don't quote me on that. You should do the math yourself, because I have a habit of making mistakes. Does that make sense? So something that in 2006 cost $108, on average, we would expect that by 2010, it would cost 115.6. Hey, who knows the world history in their own lifetime? And you guys are what? You're 2001 babies? 2000? 2000? 2000? 2000? Anyone 2001? Okay, so when you were 8 years old, you probably didn't have much knowledge of this, but your parents probably did because they were probably stressing out. What happened in 2008? Does anyone know? When the wheels fell off the economy? So the United States had this thing they did where they said for years and years and years, hey, do you want a mortgage, but you've got like no job and no money? That's okay. You can buy that $400,000 house. We'll lend you all the money. And then what happens when a whole bunch of people can't pay? They get kicked out of their houses, right? Which sucks. But now imagine a neighborhood where you've got like 15 empty houses. What starts to happen to the value of those houses? They go down. So now the value of everyone's house goes down. Now let's say you live in a house, you owe $400,000 on it, and you look around the neighborhood and you see houses just like yours selling, but they're only selling for $300,000, which means your house is worth negative $100,000 to you. What do? Well, you know what people did? They just walked to the bank with the keys and said, here you go. I'm going to declare bankruptcy. Yeah, I have to declare bankruptcy, but that's better than owning something that's worth $100,000 less than I owe you on it. So they just leave. And now you've got even more abandoned houses in the neighborhood. Hey, what happens to the value of houses then? Goes down. In the meantime, what happens to all the people who own stock in these banks that used to have a regular monthly supply of income from these people with mortgages who now have just gone and said, here are these houses, and all those houses are losing value? The bank stocks were tanking. And so in 2008, the economy just blew up. So I'd be curious to see, I don't know the answer to this, I intentionally didn't look, but I'd be curious to see what happens to the CPI in 2008. I bet we don't see the same increase. I bet it steadies out for a little bit.
You know what you do then? You become an investor and you go to the bank.
Oh yeah, sure. Sure.
If you.
Why did you stop yourself from looking?
Because I want to have the thrill of discovery with you. Is that so hard to imagine? Let's take a look.
When the economy collapses, it's terrible, but at the same time, there's positives to it.
Sure.
Like all the stocks are really dirt cheap.
All right, so here we go. We've got 1998 to... Yeah, and look, in 2008 to 2009, hardly goes up at all, right? So there's that little blip in there. And then it keeps going like you'd expect it to, keeps going up by about 2%. In fact, it has a really big year from 2010 to 2011. See, it jumps up like 3%. But 2008, we get that blip where it hardly changes, just goes up 0.3%.
Oh, we were close.
So altogether, we said it was going to be what? 115? And it was 116. Because these years, 2005, 2006, 2007, 2008, they were all pretty big. See all those? Those are all over 2.
Ours was
0.6. Yeah, there you go. So we got it pretty accurately. That makes sense? By the way, what website are we on? statcan.gc.ca. Pretty great. Okay, one more thing, and then I'm going to shut up and let you guys do work on whatever it is you need to get work on. The other thing we use an index for is not over time, but over space or over places. So an index can be over time. It can also be or different locations. So this is one cleverly also initialed CPI, but this is specifically what? Clothing prices. And so literally, and again, this is a company called P&E, Prices and Earnings. This is a real company, and they would hire a statistician. How'd you like this job? And your job is to go buy the same pair of jeans in 12 different cities, and buy the same shirt in 12 different cities, and the same jacket in 12 different cities, and maybe the same purse, and maybe a pair of shoes, right? And you go city to city, and then you add up what it costs, and you make a baseline. Hey, what city, if you had to guess?
Use your own money to go buy all these your job?
No, that's the nice part of the job. You'd use their money. I don't know, probably. So now look at this. Hey, if you've already written the questions, fine. But let's look just at the data table. What city do you think they operate out of? What city do you think I would find Price and Earnings headquarters in? New York. Because what have they treated as the index baseline? That's right. They've made New York the base. So let's take a look at how the cost in different cities to buy clothing compares to New York. In the year, now this is from what year? 2006. Jeez, there's no new data in this thing. I'm annoyed by that. That's okay. What do you see on here? What's the cheapest place to buy a shirt and a pair of pants and a jacket? In Delhi. Yeah, does anyone know where Delhi is, by the way? In India. Very good. What's the most expensive place? Yeah, Tokyo. Tokyo, of course, is in Japan. Yeah. Hey, what's one of the cheapest places to buy a shirt? Toronto. Toronto, Canada has a relatively low cost of living. And Canadian cities have a relatively low cost of living. So when we go to Toronto, we think of it as being pretty expensive. Now, since 2006, I'd be interested to see this. P&E's clothing price index. Clothing and footwear by country.
It seems like a job that you would apply for.
I would love that kind of job. Statistician. I like numbers. They're good jobs. If you like the stat side of math, they're very, very good jobs in that field. Because here's what I like. I'm not very good at any one thing, but I'm a little bit good at a lot of stuff. And that to me screams high school teacher. You know? Like I like chemistry. I'm not a chemist. I like physics. I'm not a physicist. I like biology. I'm not a biologist. Where do you get to do a little bit of all those things? Teach in high school. So it's a good gig for me. I like it. So if you are somebody who likes to buy a lot of clothes, what city might you like to live in? Yeah, New York's pretty good. But just in terms of cost, what if you're kind of, you don't have a whole lot of money and you like to buy clothes? Where should you live? In Toronto, in India, in where else is cheap? Rome, in Italy. Toronto would be all right. Not going to live in India. Hong Kong. Hong Kong's an amazing city. Where is it really, really, really expensive to buy clothes? Japan. Yeah, very, very expensive. Zurich. Yeah. Yeah, it's funny how different. I'm surprised, like the ones that surprise me, Rome surprised me. I picture that like it's a big tourist town, big city. You think of it as like the big fashion houses there. I've never been. Has anyone ever been to Italy? I have Italian family and they come visit us and they're amazing. So I've always wanted to go, but I haven't made it yet. One day. Anyway, obviously, how do clothing prices in Zurich and Hong Kong compare to New York? If you went to Zurich or you went to Hong Kong, clothes are more expensive in? Yeah, Zurich is more expensive. By the way, Zurich is in what country? Does anyone know? That's right, Switzerland. And Hong Kong, on the other hand, is cheaper. This, by the way, if you're ever looking at moving somewhere internationally, do you know a lot of people, a lot of people after college or after university will get their TESOL certificate. Do you know what TESOL stands for? You can do it. It's like a 3-month class you take, and you learn teaching English as a second language. All right, so this is, like I said, you pay a couple grand, you go to school for this, they give you a certificate that says you're now a certified foreign English teacher. And then a ton of people I know went to Japan for a couple of years, where there's high demand for English speaking. Korea, huge demand. These are countries with lots and lots and lots of money, and they need people to teach they want their citizens to learn English. So my friend Jeff lived for 5 years in Japan. My cousin Mel lived for 2 years in South Korea. But it's interesting because one of the things you have to look up is they say, hey, we're going to pay you 52 grand US a year. You go, hey, I'm just out of college. That's pretty good money. Well, my cousin Mel made that in South Korea. She had a friend who did the same thing in Thailand. They had two very different experiences. Because my cousin Mel living in South Korea, that 52 grand, geez, it didn't go very far. The rent was expensive, food was expensive, transportation was expensive, everything was expensive. She had a good time, but she didn't save any money, right? Like she just kind of got by on what she made. She got to travel and move around. It was a cool experience. Her friend, our friend, who did the same thing in Thailand, came back with a ton of money saved because clothing was pretty cheap, rent was cheap, food was cheap, right? So you make basically the same money in two different places. It's worth looking up things like this. Now, obviously, clothing isn't just the big one, but the huge one is housing. Looking at what housing costs in different cities. And that's something if you're ever thinking about going somewhere internationally or traveling or moving somewhere, asking the question, what does it cost to live there? So there's some questions on here. You can work on that. I did give you an assignment on Friday. You can work on that. I'd like that collected if you've got it done. Yeah, get to it.